We're going to get rolling. Thanks for coming in this morning. If you don't know where you are, this is the new and improved Casper Suite. Now I guess you could call it almost 9.2 API. You may have heard about 9.2 in an earlier presentation today. It's going to be on the street fairly soon. That's all we can say right now. Stay tuned. Couple things I want to talk about before we get into this. I got the opportunity to stand at the back of the room for the keynote, and one of the things I noticed was there were a bunch of laptops who had a blue JSS on them instead of a green JSS, and that was like super cool. How many of you were here a year ago to see the demo of what turned into 9.0? It took a little bit longer than we thought to get that on the street, and a year ago we were standing at the back of the room, we saw a lot of green. So today, to see that is just outstanding. We're lucky enough to have two of the guys today who did a bunch of the work on that to talk about the API stuff, but that's just amazing. The other thing I want to mention, one of the things that we're talking about today is the event API and how you can use that to be a little more effective in your enterprise. I was poking around the mini events that are out on the JNUC site. And tonight, oddly enough, there's a group meeting over at Dunn Brothers to talk about help desk integration with the JSS. Just happened to run into it by accident. Are any of the folks here involved with that, potentially? I don't see any hands. Maybe there are. It's hard to see down here. But anyway, I have a hunch they might be talking about the API there a little bit. So it might be a good follow-on to this as well. What else have I got? Community. You heard Zach and Woody and Chip talk about community. And one of the things about the API and the use of it is how the community's got involved with that. And when we get to the end of the session, we've got some examples from one of our partners, part of the community. They've open sourced some things to share with you guys as well, and we'll talk about that. But we're super interested in what you guys do with the API, what your use cases are, kind of what problems you're trying to solve with it, because there are a number of things that you guys are doing that might need to come back into the JSS so we can make them a little more easy for you and do those kinds of things. The other thing I want to mention, because all the kids are doing it now, is live tweeting. I'm not really sure what that is. These young guys explain it to me. So we created this JNUC underbar new API. So if you want to throw questions at that as we're going through. I'll actually try and keep my eye on it and answer questions as we go along. Again, this is we're going to have a lot of time at the end for Q&A as well. We want to hear your questions and your thoughts on these different things. I guess we should actually introduce who's going to be up here on stage today. Eric, you want to raise your hand? Eric's one of our developers. He's done a lot of work on JSS connectors. Some of you may be aware we have a connector that plugs into Microsoft's SCCM. We have another one that will plug into Altiris. We have one that will move data between different JSSs. Eric's done the work on that and a lot of the API stuff. Matt, you want to raise your hand? He's the other guy there. Matt is the development manager for our server team. So he's responsible for the guys who put together the underpinnings of the JSS, make it talk to the database, make it put HTML together so you guys have that cool new blue UI to take a look at. And he's going to take you through some of the new stuff. The third face you see up there, Tom Moore, is one of our software engineers. He's actually the first developer that Zach hired 6 years ago to work on the JSS. Zach sat in his class in college, and Tom explained the architecture that is the JSS today. A few years later, Zach went back to Tom and said, you know, I'm looking for a developer who might understand how to help me put this architecture together. And Tom said, you know what? I'm getting ready to retire from this teaching thing, and I'd really like to write some software. You won't see Tom here today, but he's sitting on his couch at home in Indiana right now, fingers crossed, hoping we don't screw this up too bad and lie about the things that he's put together into the software. And I'm just here to hold the mic and let these guys talk. My name's John Sutcliffe. I work with the dev team. I have that honor. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to Matt to start to take you through this. So here we go.
Sure. Hey, guys. Like John said, I'm just going to go over some of the new stuff in the API, kind of do an overview. My part's going to be fairly quick. Then Eric's going to talk about the Events API. So, yeah, like I just said, the REST API, and then talk about the Events API, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers after that. And if you see Eric and I wandering around out in the lobbies, just grab us if you have questions too. So the REST API. First off, I thought I'd start with what is a REST API, just quick. The first part is REST, which means representational state transfer. I'll bring this back together in just a second. That's kind of just a bunch of mumble jumble, I'm sure, for a bunch of people. API, that's application programming interface. How to bring it together a little bit. It allows us to change the state of objects within the JSS or any piece of software really, but we're talking about the JSS here, using an external application or script. So that's kind of bringing the two. We're changing state of some kind of object in the JSS, a computer, a mobile device, using an external program. So some examples of that, like I just said, changing a computer name would be changing state, changing a static computer group, membership, things like that. So what's new in the REST API in 9.0? One of the new things that a lot of us kind of like, we're proud of, I guess, is the documentation we've added. That's, we think, really helpful. There's some new features that have also been added, new calls you can make and that sort of thing. And also, I'll talk about some gotchas and share a few ideas we have for future improvements. So the first thing, documentation. We've added the idea of examples in the documentation, so you actually get to see what you'll be doing or what can come out of that call to the API. And also the try it option, so along with that example, having the option to hit a button and just get it right there alongside the documentation. So here's an example of, it's really hard to see, and I guess it wasn't so much the idea of seeing the text here, but just that you see all the calls that can be made against the computer here, listed out as getters or gets, posts, puts, and deletes. So then this is the try it option that I mentioned, and right here in line with the documentation, being able to enter in a parameter for computer lookup and getting the results there in line. Not that this would be super helpful in exporting data or changing state on an object in the JSS, but to be able to try something and get some results back right there is kind of cool. Yeah, there's the XML. And the other thing that's kind of handy with the documentation is listing parameters. So you can see here, this is an example of a call to the API where there's multiple parameters and just kind of listed out very clearly our ID and subset. And so you can fill those out along with some text up top explaining how to fill those out. And just a zoomed in view of that. Oh, it's kind of cool. I don't have a lot to say about it. It's just, it's a nice way to see what's available, what you can call. Improved subset support in 9.0. Adding the idea of subset of information from a call to more objects. So in this case, it's mobile devices. You can see that we have, similar to the last screen, ID and subset here, but being able to same as an 8, specify different categories along with that. But as you can see, this is now with the mobile devices object. And then just the XML back from that with those two subsets for mobile devices. And some changes for updating records with puts, the put method. Only fields provided are updated in 9. So if you leave fields out, we're not going to change the state of the object, change the values of fields that you don't include in the XML. So if you only want to update the computer name and its department, that's all the information you need to include. And also just a note that empty fields are ignored and default values for the objects are used. So if you did include a tag but didn't have a value, it's going to get a default value. Some gotchas. This may seem pretty obvious to some, but puts and posts for smart group membership are ignored. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The whole idea of a smart group is to define the criteria and have the membership calculated dynamically. But just something to make note of. One of the output formats is JSON along with XML. That's for output only. The only thing we accept in is XML. JSON's out. And another thing to think about is the order of object creation, and this is fairly simple to think about. I'm not talking about anything super crazy here. If you think about it in terms of the JSS GUI, you just need to create some objects before you can use them in calls. So in the example here, if you're going to use a building or department while updating a computer or updating location information, you need to make sure those buildings and departments are there first. It's pretty obvious, but it's a little bit harder to remember all that when you're doing it through the API. So a couple ideas we have for things going forward, some kind of pain points that we see is listing required fields. How do you know which fields are required? That's just something we don't call out right now. I'm thinking that would be something in the documentation, but that's something on the roadmap for the API. And also field deprecation. One example of this is to use the new epoch date that we're passing down instead of the more human readable date that we've typically sent. That's the way all our dates have moved in MySQL and that sort of thing, and that's what the API will spit out in the future. So it's one of those examples of deprecating fields. It's still available if you look at the API now, but it could be gone soon. Next, I'll hand it over to Eric for the event stuff. Yep.
If you guys don't remember, so I think the events API is one of the questions we have to ask is, why do we actually need another API? The REST API has a lot of power. We can get really great insight into the state of the JSS, and we can actually change that state, and I think Matt showed that really well. The issue with REST, and we saw this before, is REST is all about state. It's right in the definition. And if we think about what the JSS is and what the JSS does, that just knowing that state or knowing what the JSS looks like at one particular time isn't really the whole picture. What's great about the JSS is it's dynamic. Things are happening. Computers check in, smart groups change, policies are running, MDM commands are executing. And we can actually infer a lot of this sort of data from the REST API, but it's not necessarily the most intuitive thing we can do. And kind of an example of this is smart groups. Very easy to get membership of a smart group from the REST API. And when the membership changes, we get it again, and the membership change is reflected. But since we're using the REST API this way, what we're actually getting is just a snapshot of that smart group right when we ran it. So it's a static snapshot, and it's not really different from that of a static group. And the real power and interesting part of the smart group, and I think Matt mentioned this, is that they change. And the REST API kind of misses that information. So I think we can talk about a use case of something that the Events API would help us with. So say we want to do something like automated ticketing. So we want to set up a smart group where devices are not checking in for some period of time. And what we want to do then is write some code and have those changes create a ticket in our ticketing system when they're added to that group. So it lets our techs know that something is up with this computer and they should go check it out. So can we do that with the REST API? And the answer is definitely. We absolutely can. But what we need to do is polling. So we periodically check in with the JSS and see if the membership is different. But to know if the membership's different, we actually had to know what the membership looked like before. So we need to store that somewhere. And another issue is computers are generally checking in just fine, and we're not going to see very much change in this group very often. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at this group and maybe not getting a lot out of it. So what the Events API can allow us to do is solve some of these problems. Another issue where we see this polling thing come up was with our SCCM plugin, our System Center Configuration Manager. If you're not familiar with SCCM, and I was not when I started working on it, it's Microsoft's system management solution for the Windows platform. So what that plugin did was every night it would take all your computers and all your mobile devices and import them to SCCM. And it was actually really great because we still get to manage our Macs with Casper, and the SCCM guys get to have their single pane of glass with all their inventory and can do reporting and that sort of thing, and everybody wins. There's a couple of issues, though, that we had. When you get a large number of computers, as I'm sure a lot of you do, this plugin can take a really long time to run, hours upon hours. And it's because there's a whole lot of data it has to deal with. We have to download inventories from computers, mobile devices. We have to format that data into something SCCM likes. And then we actually have to send it there, and SCCM then has to do a lot of processing. So it's a really intensive process for everything that's involved. SCCM, the JSS, the network. And we have all this load, so we turn the frequency of the polling way down. So it could be up to 24 hours before SCCM knows that a computer submitted new inventory. Another thing is that computers don't change their inventory that frequently. So we're doing a lot of this work, but not very many computers have actually changed, so there's a lot of overhead there. And where events-based plugins relieve this is that it only happens when a device checks in. So we listen for the event, and when a computer submits its inventory, we can send just that computer right then to SCCM, so we have a lot less overhead. Find one of my slides. So if you guys kind of are not following what I'm talking about, let's take a look at a JSS events plugin. We have a new JSS to JSS plugin that's coming out, and let's go take a look at that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go to the mobile devices tab on our 9.0 JSS, and we see that we actually don't have any inventory yet. So when we go up to the 8 series JSS, we'll go check inventory. And this time under mobile devices, we see Jessica's iPod when it catches up. So once we go to details, we're going to actually tell it to update. And since this 8 series JSS has our new events plugin installed in it, when this inventory is complete, it's actually going to automatically send it to our other JSS for us. If you know, the UDIT ends in 6054. So we can go and check. We're going to do our search again. And we see that Jessica's iPod has actually shown up. And we'll go down to the hardware tab. And we see that our UDIT ends in 6054. So automatically, without us doing anything other than some setup, when that device checked in, we get the inventory. So that's kind of the flow of events plugins. So if you want to make your own, there are 3 basic things that you kind of do. The first is you have to let the JSS know that you're actually waiting for events. The second, we have to actually tell the JSS which events we really care about. And the third is actually deal with that. So that first one, registering as an event monitor, there was an Events API reference that I posted to the group beforehand, and there's a document in there that covers, it does an example and covers the first point really clearly. So it really just involves creating a specific file and some specific folders, and it actually does it a lot more clearly than I think I could do on stage. So we're gonna move on to the second 2 points, which as a programmer I like because they involve writing code. And so what they really are we have to implement an interface to do this, and it's the Jamf Event Notification Monitor. There are 2 methods, and the first one is registered for event. And how that one works is when the JSS starts up, it calls this method for us repeatedly with each of these event type identifiers. And we just return a Boolean saying if we want to receive those in the future or not. So an event type identifier, what that is is this slide we saw earlier. It's one of these 15 things that the JSS, excuse me, they're one of 15 events that are happening inside the JSS that we can actually listen for and receive events about. Anything for like computers checking in, mobile device doing commands, smart group mobile device membership change, which would not fit on one line. So what that is registered from event method looks like, it's really straightforward. We just get each of the events, and we just return true or false depending on if we want it or not. So this is actually the implementation of that method from that JSS to JSS plugin I just showed you. Damn thing. All right, so the second event, if we go back, or the second method, if we go back to the interface, is event occurred. And this is where we really get to do whatever it is that our application is going to do. But I found when I'm writing plugins that there are generally about 4 things that happen. The first is we have to tell what type of event we actually got. Generally, we register for more than one type of event, so we could be receiving a JSS startup or a mobile device check-in. So we need to know which one actually happened. Next, we want to actually get the device or computer that actually caused that event. So depending on the event, it can be a mobile device, it could be a computer, a smart group, or it could be the JSS itself. Then we want to get some data out of that event object and the event itself. And finally, do whatever application-specific thing is that we want to do. So what getting the event looks like is from the parameter we get from that method, we can get this generic event type. And from that event type, we want to check to see which specific it is. So here I'm just checking to see if it's an instance of mobile device command completed. And once we've done that, we can actually cast that to mobile device command completed because that allows us access to some extra information about that event. From that event, we can get the object that caused this event. It's a mobile device. And so it's just a simple method call. And why we're going through mobile device command completed is there's a little gotcha in the Events API. Computers have a really straightforward event you can register for when they submit inventory. It's computer inventory completed, but mobile devices don't have such a cut and dry equivalent. So what we can actually do is we register for mobile device command completed, and we check that the command is update inventory, and then the result status is acknowledged. There's other commands we could also check for, such as install profile and that sort of thing, but only when a mobile device is doing its inventory does this condition happen. Mobile devices are a bit chatty with the Events API. If you were to actually register for all the mobile device events I showed you, and you click the update inventory button, you get somewhere between 14 and 16 different events. But there's only one of them that meets this condition, so that's a good one to check for. The final one as a gotcha I want to talk about is in 9.0, we actually added the ability to get computer and mobile device JSS ID. There's a small quirk with that, though, is the mobile device event object we've been using so far is actually an interface. The implementation of that is mobile device event shell, and it was actually only added to the implementation. So we're almost done with code. So if this isn't making any sense, we'll move on in a second. But the last thing is really just to do whatever it is that your application wanted to do. So we can send data to SCCM or Altiris or Zendesk or another JSS. Last year, Matt showed how to run a script based on an event. And Ryan Yonk, one of our architects, showed how to send an email when a mobile device was unenrolled. But really, it can actually be anything that Java can do. So there are really no limits, with a few exceptions. The code you write is going to be part of the JSS. So any resources you use are not available. If I use all the memory in my plugin, the JSS isn't going to have that memory available to it. You can actually stop the JSS from loading properly if you do something like that, or if you reference a library that the JSS can't find, your web app will actually not finish loading. So if you're not a developer, and all that stuff I said was like, ugh, Java, but you still have some really great ideas of things you could do with the Events API, there are other people in the same boat. So a couple months ago, we had a customer who was interested in taking events information and sending it to another group that they had in their company, who that group would deal with it. So we kind of saw that there was some value in that beyond just their use case. So we put together a proof of concept for them, and I'm going to share that with you guys today. So it's called the Event Alert plugin, and the basic idea is we register for events about computers, mobile devices, and their smart groups, and we collate some information out of that, and we post that message to some arbitrary server or service that's configurable. And kind of like where we can use something like that is going back to this automated ticking ideal. We saw that we could probably do it with the REST API, but a better way we could do is with this new events thing. So the help desk guys are on our back again and are bugging us about this automated ticketing thing, but we're not really Java programmers. So what we can do is we can configure this plugin, and we can send the smart group events off to the help desk guys, and they get to implement adding it to the ticketing system. So what this kind of could look like is I've installed it over on this 9 series JSS, and I'm going to go up to smart groups, or go to mobile device smart groups, and we can see there's one called not checking in. And the criteria for this are that the device hasn't submitted its inventory in 14 days, or its display name is demo, because I didn't want to have to wait for 2 weeks and try to time this correctly. So what I did is we're going to go back to my iPod this time, and we're actually going to tell it to check in because I've changed its name to demo. So it's going to fall into this smart group, and when it does, we're going to create a message, and we're going to send it off to a server that's going to make the ticket for us. So we go and we're going to go check out the log. It's going to show what happened for us. And we see that there's this XML message that we got. And there's a lot of information in here, kind of about various parts of the event. But we can see that there's a mobile device group called Not Checking In. There's some devices added, and one of them was this new demo device that I just renamed. So we can see that we get a list of devices added, devices removed, and lots of information that we can use to then construct callbacks to the REST API and get more details about that device or that group. But we see that the help desk guys haven't implemented their side yet, so it's not quite done. So the idea here was we could still utilize the Events API without having to do any, or even maybe just a little bit of Java coding. So that's the Events API, and I think John had a couple links he wanted to share with you.
We're going to talk about a couple links to share some things. We're going to talk about community, and then we're going to go into some Q&A and see what you guys have. There are a couple things that have been flowing across the Twitter sphere. Have to be careful when you say that, although I did see a warning at the door, strong language in this session, so be careful. The first one is all the sessions are up on Jamf Nation, and all the materials you see here, we'll have the presentation up there. It's hard to click the link to the presentation until you get the presentation, but look for it there. The other thing is we talk about community. Sitting down here in the front row, where's he at? Oh, right there with his hand in the air. From Stony River, Jeremy Matthews has done a bunch of stuff. He and his team have done a bunch of things, some integration stuff, and they've been kind enough to put this stuff up on Git for you guys to take a look at as well. So we put links for that. There's a link for that. The first one is there's a script that'll actually pull data out and push it over into Google Charts so you can build a pie chart. Again, it's a quick example of some way you might interact with the REST API if you wanted to build a management portal or something else. This also kind of ties into a session we'll be doing tomorrow on advanced reporting. Being able to take more of the information that's locked in your JSS and put it into a reporting situation for your managers or whomever else may be interested in all that data. One of the things we like to do is to cross-sell our sessions because we don't want to be the only session that has nobody come to it. So maybe we'll have free prizes tomorrow. And you get to see Matt again, too, so that'll be exciting. The other thing they put together was actually an iOS app that does the same thing. So if you have an interest in putting something together for your iPads or whatever else, again, to help make the managers feel important, they can be sitting in a boring meeting and they can quick bring up some statistics from their JSS and look important. That's what these guys do for me. and that's the only reason I get to get up on the stage. But again, that source code's up there. The last thing is, and I've seen at least 2 questions so far about help desk integration from the JSS and how do I do that. We'll talk about that more when we get into the questions here. But there is a self-service plugin for the help desk team. And is that the client? That's on the client side. So that's if you're running self-service on your client machines, you can actually build plugins for those things as well to be able to tie into that. So that goes there. So with that, you guys want to come up and we'll open this up for questions. I know they talk things about casting and different things like that. And as we're in a stage, did it have anything to do with? Never mind. That's not very good. Let's go take a look at the questions first. Where's Rich? Rich had the first right there. Did we come anywhere in the neighborhood of getting to your question answered?
My question was specifically integrating Casper API with web help desk. As I understand, there have been some database table changes so that right now Casper keeps corresponding with web help desk, but Casper 9 is not currently. So I wanted to find out what could be done. Because basically what I want to do is pull asset information out of Casper, put it into web help desk, and have that.
A couple different things. Actually, the database has changed a lot. Tomorrow we will go into some of those changes in the reporting session because there's some things that we did do to make it simpler to interact with the database. We're going to kind of step on our own toes when we show you how to interact with the database because we said for a long time, use the API, don't interact with the database. It's not for the faint of heart. You want to be careful because you can impact performance, but it is necessary. We are working, I did have some contact in the last few weeks with an individual web help desk about that very thing. And they are taking a look at it. A couple approaches you could take. Well, if you guys want to, I won't talk about it. You guys talk about it.
Yeah, well, I haven't talked about, you kind of talked to him more about it, I think, than I have, so.
Yeah. Well, again, they're trying to decide if they're going to go forward, go to the API route, or stay on the database side. I don't know what decision they're going to make. If you wanted to do something yourself, again, you could use the examples from the event API. So for instance, a computer checks in, sends something over into the help desk at that point. What kind of information are you looking for to get over there? Just for the technicians to be able, give us a use case, and then we can kind of talk it through.
For example, right now we're able to we have a lot of our assets recorded in our web help desk system. We'd like users to be able to key off the serial number that we put in web help desk, and then go to Casper and say, okay, I've got a serial number, I want to pull the information up. Who's got this machine currently, using live, all that web help, should be able to pull that information from our active directory system. So the idea is that we're able to provide, when we look at web help desk, look up that serial number, we're able to say, okay, this person has this machine that's located here, and in the event that the machine goes to transfer, which happens occasionally in our labs, that we'll be able to, that information will just automatically update in web help desk and say, okay, this person has this machine.
Yeah, I think that's all.
You want to repeat the question, kind of? Maybe shorter. So, okay, so machines exist in the web help desk system. Somebody calls the help desk, they're going to give you a serial number. Technician's going to go in and they're going to put that serial number in, and you want to be able to quickly look it up in the JSS, look it up in web help desk, understand the information. When the inventory reports from that machine to the JSS, if it's got a new user, it's got a new location, something is different, that should flow through to web help desk, right?
We have labs that will change around machines and not necessarily tell us. So we'd like to find out if this machine that we purchased for this person is now actually being used by this person.
So Rich has a use case I'm sure none of the rest of you have. I'm repeating this so everybody can hear it, but he actually has users who won't tell IT when they change something. See, that doesn't ever, that never happens at Jamf. Bryce, our IT admin, I hope is not in the room right now because they're glaring at us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So again,
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer for it, but I think it's a perfect use case of Events API tied with the REST API. You know, we don't have a solution developed exactly for that, but I think it's a perfect use case for what we've just talked about today.
Yeah, so if you look at the example Eric gave, two ways you could approach it. One could simply be you build something off the devices checking in and do the updates right from there. So when you get a computer inventory event, you could put the code in a sense, into the JSS and push the necessary data into Web Help Desk. I don't think I would, off the top of my head, I wouldn't go that way. What I would do, though, is the example he gave where it wrote an event, or it gave some basic detail about the device, put it in a queue somewhere, write it to disk, write a separate application then that looks for that, picks it up, and can put it into Web Help Desk. So what you've done is now you're getting that information to Web Help Desk live, but you're also not putting additional load on your JSS, writing additional processing there, and take that approach to it. So that'd be one way. The other way is, you know, you could poll for changes. But again, I think the event API is really a much better way to go. Then you're not just looking for data, creating more I/O on your server and all those kinds of things. So, and we can talk more specifics about that if you'd like to as well. But does that case make sense to people? Is that something people are looking for? Oh, all the hands go up in the room in my mind. All right, no, there's another question. The next question was about the Flickr API and the Explorer. The question was from Weldon. Did I say that right? Where's Weldon? Oh, up there. The question was, is our intention, Jamf Software, of the API doc page to provide something like the Flickr API Explorer? I'm not familiar with the Flickr API.
I have to admit, I'm not either.
All right.
Yeah.
You want to give us a little more insight, kind of where you're headed with that? And
Well, it looks like you developed fields and get live results.
Yeah.
yes.
What the API would return if you follow those parameters.
Yep.
Okay, that was the question.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and it's actually a open source library that we use for that, listed on the acknowledgments of the JSS. So yeah, you may see it out on the web and other places too, but yeah, that's the intent of it.
John tweeted about would love to see some people using this at Zendesk. Are there other Zendesk users out there? Many. Do you see value in this? Are you already doing something with this? Anybody can jump in if they want to. Oh, you're using Web Help Desk.
Yeah, we are. We evaluated this over past months. One thing that was we found to be a weakness was that they didn't have good asset management integration. They had a couple other cloud inventory providers that would integrate with them. But one of the things with that was that almost invariably you had to install another agent to send the inventory information up to the cloud provider, and then he would send it over to Zendesk. And we were asking, is it possible to just, we have existing systems, can we just push it in to Zendesk? And at the time, the answer was yes. That was actually one of the things that, when we were looking at this, we were like, Web Help Desk actually has really good asset management. And that was one of the things that kept us on Web Help.
Cool.
Yeah, right here in the middle.
Oh.
Two guys.
Oh,
Right in a row.
you guys fight it out, and whoever wins.
So, Kevin, for you, interest in the API. So, where do I get started? Where's documentation? Where's that fancy stuff?
The question is, how do you get to the documentation? How to get started playing around with the API? That documentation is just at /API. So if you just go to whatever context you have the JSS running at /API, that documentation will pop up. So it's a lot easier to remember than API front page .rest or whatever it was.
It's the little things. I even remember it sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is pretty simple to go in and play around with the parameters. You can go right in. It's actually going to have a template of what the call looks like, so you can start to run it, start to fill in parameters, and then sort of slowly expand how you understand it and how you'd interact with it.
So this is what I would hand off to, say, developers to say,
Yes.
Sure.
Well, there are two layers. The first layer is if you got another development team who needs to reach into the JSS to get information, that's where you want to start them. If you want to start to build some infrastructure around the events, then we've got that documentation that's actually attached to this event where we have sample code and some of Jeremy's sample code. I'd get them pointed at that, and that'll be good examples for them to get rolling from that standpoint.
Yep, and the updated events API is always shipped with the JSS. It lives right with all the other jars in the deployment. So you could tell them that too. They could check that out.
This one right behind.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a chance to play with the API or not. I was wondering if you guys had the ability to create a policy with the API. That's somewhere you won't let me know. My use
Forget
case.
that's added.
My use case is we do a lot of Git, check all of our code in, we use Fabricator code review. I like to use something very similar for all of your policies and information. I don't really want anyone to go in there and make a policy unless it's a review.
Sure. Yeah, that's the trouble with Tom being on our presenter slide is he's the guy that's been in this the whole 9.0 development time, and I just can't quite remember. Do you?
So what we'll do is we will write that down. Between the three of us, we'll remember half of the question, but we will put it in the discussion on this event, so we can get an answer for you. And if you think of it before us, just rephrase your question out there as well. And what I encourage everybody as well is if you do think of things after this session, Matt and I will be here at least the next 2 days. I'm here through Thursday. Eric's got to go back today because you may have heard of a release from Apple coming out soon, and he's the guy holding us up. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know who volunteered him for this session, but post your questions out there. We'll keep our eye on it. More questions?
Sure. Right here.
Yep, it'll post it to a URL, or actually multiple URLs for one type of event even, yeah.
Others? Right here.
Can you talk a bit more about JSS connector plugin you mentioned? Interested in maybe using that as a means to migrate rather than exporting and importing database.
Sure. Talk about the two versions of it too.
Sure, so we have one that's already released that uses the conduit. And what that one is that's like the SCCM one where on a schedule it'll export everything. And the new one we're doing is an events-based API one. So there are some things where that may not be the greatest way to do it. I think this is a normal database. It's probably a little more straightforward because between the 9 and the 8 REST API, we probably don't grab quite everything. I think a few things do get missed. Just as there's some incompatibility there, so.
Yeah, that would be, we could probably talk about that one offline too, about some of the I'm trying to think through some of the different scenarios. If I understand the use case, it'd be, I got a JSS 8, whatever, put the JSS connector in place.
The big problem
I could
is
use the...
they're not really enrolled to the second JSS. Their inventory's in there.
Yeah.
But they're not going to, the certificate communication is going to be broken. So it's really for just collecting data, perhaps from a bunch of offices into one master JSS where all that data will live, but they actually still are checking in and interacting with their first JSS, so. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, kind of some of the use cases we see around the JSS connector is we have some customers who they're more of a holding company situation. So when they acquire new companies or things, those companies want their autonomy. Sites may or may not work for them. So the approach they take is corporate wants a full inventory. They at least want to see the equipment. They want to understand what it is. They've got their reports and things they want to do. They don't want to have any management capabilities on those devices. So what they do is they put the management JSS on site or wherever to manage that arm of the corporation. And then they use the JSS connector to push that data up to corporate so they can do their kind of approach to things that way. The other one too is more of a kind of a data warehousing situation where you want to do corporate reporting off of, maybe you have several JSSs around, or even if you just have one very large one and you don't want to take a risk of impacting the performance, because again, the JSS is designed to be a transactional system to be able to respond to all those devices checking in. So if I start to build up a big reporting infrastructure off my production JSS, I could have some things that run in there too. So that's where the connector could come in and be very powerful.
If I could piggyback off of this question, we have a situation at Ohio State where I've been running our JSS for 5 or 6 years, and the department level is about to go to college level. They've stood up their 9, 1 lot in a very, very different scene. We don't necessarily want to recreate the wheel from our mature one. Would there be a scenario for that to use cost? And maybe I can even envision a deal where, even though it's not enrolled per se, I can cheat for at least a year, where hey, there's some stuff in there that it's not managed. But I'd like to be able to do a 9, not because they wouldn't let me migrate per se my stuff over.
I guess the simple answer is sure.
Yeah.
I guess in that situation, if they'd be cool with, just tell us what devices you have, we won't manage them, we can see them, let's think about re-enrolling them in this new JSS down the road. Yeah, that might be a good starting point to get you there on that route. But again, you're still going to have to find a way to get those machines enrolled in that other JSS at some point.
Right, and it's not going to move things like policies or packages or that sort of thing. It's just device or computer information currently.
That's an interesting use case though, because at least I hadn't really been thinking about it that way. But that's cool. That's why we love having you guys come to Minnesota to see us. Besides to get to see the lovely weather.
It's in the back.
Is there a possibility to use the API to import packages into JSS, whether it's new packages or updated packages? The use case there is to use auto package Jenkins to be building packages overnight and have those automatically updated to JSS, or if there's a new package, bring up package.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a possibility for it. That's something we could talk with you about a little bit more too. Yeah, but that's not, not there now, but it's a cool idea.
Yeah, there was at Maxis admin too. There was some stuff about auto package. There was a presentation. Greg Nagel, I think, did it. I think I'm getting the name right. Yeah. And that's something we're going to talk to some folks about this week as well. Which I'm not sure if it exactly falls in with where you're headed here, but something we really want to take a hard look at and see what we could do there, especially with the distribution points and those kinds of things. So.
So you said all this Java code is installed into our JSS. How does that work with version minus post integration?
It's a good question.
That's a good question.
We'll give you Eric Krause's home phone number.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's something that we've talked about a little bit with Krause, and Eric Krause is the manager of the online services department. Yeah, we've talked about it. We don't have a solution for that right now because it's just hard to get there. But.
Yeah, there are a number of challenges with that one too, because now you're talking about, we hosted our hostings on Amazon, and we want to tie into the event API and then potentially reach back into your organization. There's some interesting challenges there from the infrastructure side, and that may be the case where maybe what we have to do is instead go to more of the polling approach and have you call out, because you can still get access to the API internally if you wanted to using the REST API if it was hosted. and you could take that approach. Again, it's not tied into the events, but it's something we're going to have to take a hard look at as we
Or I
go
think
forward.
there'd be the possibility of Eric's, the XML posting
Yeah.
event stuff
Something
too.
like that.
I think that would be more possible.
Question about the JSS connector. Is there any performance hits if you use that? Because I'm thinking of a use case where you may want to set up like a second Jamf instance, and then you just replicate kind of between that pod or this, and then whenever you're doing network updates, kind of on our dev side for the
In terms of performance, we haven't actually measured anything, but it's a pretty lightweight system. It's using the REST API, so it's pulling down data and just sending it with a little bit of XML playing with, just to make things a little better. So I don't know for sure, but I haven't seen any sort of slowdown or anything like that.
Well, and the conduit version of the connector is scheduled. So if you were concerned, you had 100,000 devices and you're going to move them all over, maybe you schedule that on a middle of the night or weekly, or you have a operational window where you could do it. If you use the event one, which hopefully we'll have out here shortly, that's going to be a trickle. So it's just going to be as devices check in. So you shouldn't have the same issue if you took that approach to it. But again, with all these things, test, and test again, because they are dependent. There's so many things that we are dependent on. Talked about, you've got your network infrastructure, database servers, and all those kinds of things. So, yeah, what do we have? About 7 minutes. Any other questions?
John or somebody else here?
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
you guys done Landesk connectors or the SCCM one for anyone before, or does one exist? Other than one be a great one?
Landesk, Web Help Desk, Zendesk. We've been asked about those a lot. We haven't done one yet, no. We hear about that one a lot. We haven't done it yet.
How about with packages? We have a deal where sites isn't quite working the way management wants it to be, where that we have packages that are only specific to this department, this department, this department, in addition to packages that would be globally available, and that may or may not come out for you guys eventually, but in the interim, if we prefix our packages with a certain, MTA, for example, could we have a deal through the API to automatically assign those to specific sites? Is that a possibility? So if, for example, the JSS sees a package with this prefix, it automatically do it, and then becomes site specific. Seems plausible.
Yeah.
Or is it bad?
What's that?
Or is that a bad idea?
Well, I think that's something that we're continuing to talk about, making more objects citable and that sort of thing. And I think just inclusion in that and the GUI would be the right thing to do there. So you can,
To wait for the GUI and then
The problem with developers are, given enough time and money, we can do anything. And we probably will, and it may not make it better. And that one, that might be a good one to talk with your support folks, or potentially talk to our pro services to see if they could work with you on something. I think the API may or may not be kind of a mechanism in there, but I think there's a number of things going on in there you want to be very careful with. You might be on a path, but I'd talk to pro services maybe a little bit to see if they had some ideas and maybe could give you a hand on that one.
somebody up here, I think.
Yeah, I thought I saw one.
It's hard to see. Wave your arms if we're not
Over
seeing.
there.
No, we have not. Well, I'm gonna change my answer a little bit because as we do in dev. No, we'll have it next week. That's not my answer to the question. Really, with all these, whether it's all these, I'll genericize a little bit to say help desk systems. All of them, it's kind of the same concept, and they all kind of come across our radar. Although I will say the Tivoli one doesn't come up as much as the other three that we've talked about. Again, we hear about that one, just not quite as often. So, again, with some of these, I would make sure you put them up as feature requests on Jamf Nation if you haven't already. We do keep our eye on that carefully, and it helps us kind of get a sense of how many people are really interested in this kind of a thing. So a lot of times somebody will put something out there, and all of a sudden it just kind of blows up. A lot of people are super interested in it, so that really helps us out.
I see a member of the plugins team in the room you could talk to if you're really interested. So.
Yeah, Deeb's down here, and he's coding it right now, so. That's a really good idea. Yes, that's an area we need to get better at, is whether it's a GitHub or a something. Simple answer is yes. A harder answer is where are we going to choose to put it and get it out there. We already have the, not the JDS,
The NetSys.
Yeah, the NetSys appliance, which we have out there, kind of that open source model. And the right answer would be kind of put it in that same kind of a location and have those things available.
Yeah,
We
but
will work on that.
We actually have been talking with product management about solutions to that problem. So it's on our radar and something that we're, hoping to solve. So.
Somebody make a plugin that could flash out the cookies database based on Casper.
One more question, anybody? The mobile device, remote comments. Remote commands.
Did we fix what with that? Okay. So just missing some documentation on the mobile device commands? Is that what your question is? Just will we provide that? I think there's some, like talking to Tom, that there's some documentation missing there that.
Okay, actually, yeah, if you stop out with, talk to the support team, they'll get a defect filed and they'll walk upstairs and kick us to try and get that put in there. So the short answer is no, we have not fixed it.
Yeah.
But when you find those things, if you support, send in a help desk or a help desk ticket. Cool.
Okay.
Great.
It's a lot like the required fields kind of thing. It's kind of the same idea that I mentioned. We don't really list the fields that are required for a lot of the stuff in the XML, so that needs to be there too.
We're around, so happy to take more questions. Thank you very much. Thanks to these guys for doing this. They've been super busy. So.